Thank you very much for inviting me. This is clearly an extremely important group for Naftogaz and for the Supervisory Board, so I'm very honoured to be here. Clearly we are very new. I have Bruno, who's one of the other Supervisory Board members here. This is only our second board meeting, so there's no way that we can understand the intricacies of the Ukraine yet. So what I thought I would do today is talk about the experience of the UK, not because the UK is important, but there are many lessons that are completely universal, I think, through what we experience that are absolutely applicable to the Ukraine. We obviously have a different history, but I still think they're very, very relevant. And everything I say is really about the responsibilities of the various parties involved and about governance. So now I do apologise for some of you who got the slides. I've changed some of the orders, but all the slides are there. There may be a few different words, but if you've got the slides, you will find them. So the first slide was just where we are. Well, clearly Ukraine has got a big problem because there's the end of the Gazprom contract at the end of 2019. So it is very important that a reliable TSO is set up with extremely good governance. We know there's good governance in the European directives, so there's a very good model. And I think, and I agree with the point about Ukrainian directives, what is really important is they must be absolutely above, they've got to be completely straightforward and clean and well regarded. There can be no stain on anyone's character who's going to be appointed a board of supervisory board. So it is very important, it doesn't matter the nationality, what matters is their abilities and also that they have got a very straightforward history. The other issue is that Ukraine has got a lot of reserves of gas, and yet the local production is not that high. And I want to talk a little bit about what we experienced we needed to get a vibrant domestic exploration and production section going, which would mean that Ukraine could become self-sufficient in gas and even an exporter. But a lot has to be done to create a regime in which that environment can thrive. I absolutely agree about monopolies. Monopolies are inefficient, they don't work well, and it doesn't matter how good the management is, unless you have pressure from other people trying to compete, you will never be an effective, efficient, well-run company, no matter how professional the management team is. So I think effective competition is important. And one of the things I'm going to say is that unbundling isn't about unbundling per se. There's nothing magic about unbundling. The magic about unbundling is it enables effective competition to happen. So I keep on hearing about unbundling as being the goal. The goal is not unbundling. You have to think about why you're unbundling. So it's really important to understand that in the context of unbundling. Clearly there's a lot of inefficient consumption here, and there's losses from corruption. So the government needs to think clearly about the incentives they want to provide for energy efficiency and for encouraging renewables, and then it's for the company and the community to deliver to those incentives that the government provides. I then wanted, this kind of is culled from the objectives that we got from government, and we're going to be responding to these in full, I hope, at our next board meeting in March to the government. But what they have asked us to do is to help the company, Naftogaz, obviously with effective governance. We need to take the management and make sure that they are performing on operational efficiency and on capital efficiency, that they're spending and investing well. But also there's this big reform agenda. And from the supervisory board members, we are completely indifferent about who owns these assets. What we do care about is they go into good hands that are also well managed and with a good supervisory board where the ethics are above question, where there's transparency and people can see what is going on. So I think we do have a duty from our experience to advise on the various options and operations and on good governance and regulation because we've got a lot of experience in that, and also to make that advice public. So I don't think just because the assets are going to be unbundled, that stops our duty to make sure that we comment on how that is done. And another target for the government, quite rightly, is that there could be a lot more domestic gas supply, and I will talk about that separately, and also energy efficiency and renewables, and Naftogaz could clearly play a very big role in that. So now I do want to go back to the UK, because this is not what I inherited, but we had decades. The whole history of the British gas industry was that it was a monopoly, it was owned by government, it was inefficient, it was not delivering value, and demonstrably not delivering value to the country. And you had one minister who would have an idea and he'd say, well, I can use this company, it's owned by me, by the government, I can use it for social policy, I can use it for employment policy. Then another minister would come along, they'd change the system. So what we ended up with was a company that was supposed to be delivering value to the country for a really important industry, but it was being meddled with by our parliamentarians. And the country eventually got so fed up of this that we decided, and we had Mrs. Thatcher who came on, and we decided to make major changes. And we decided that the only way we can change this is by privatising. So this is when I came. So when I came in. But actually, before I go on to this, let me just talk. We did have, and you can see here sort of different colours. This is our offshore industry. We had a thriving offshore, competitive exploration and production industry, which was delivering really well. So why was it delivering? Well, first of all, we had a simple and transparent one-stop licensing regime. It was run by the Department of Energy. The government set the parameters of this licensing regime, but it was delivered by a unit within the government, and it was very straightforward, very transparent. Everyone knew what the rules were, and they knew the rules wouldn't change. If they got a license, the rules were going to be stable. One of the very big issues is, of course, they sold at market price. I mean, that is kind of rule number one, is economics 101. You must ensure that companies can sell their product at whatever the market price is. Now, that means that sometimes they will be making excess profits. So what you also do is you create a licensing regime that says, if the profits are really high, we're going to take a share of that as a government. You know we're going to. We'll allow you to benefit, but we will take a share of those profits. So you can sell at market price, but if that price means you're getting excess profits, the government is going to have its share. You'll get a fair return, and in that licensing regime, you want to incentivise good behaviour. You want to incentivise investment, you want to reward success, and also you want to say that you cannot sit on a licence. There will be conditions. If you have a licence, you have to deliver, say, you have to drill a well, or you have to provide some seismic. And by the way, if you ever give up that licence, all that data is going to be passed on to the new company, because that's public data. Because that data is important for anyone who's using that licence to understand. So if you don't have the licence anymore, whoever takes on the licence will have that data. And that data is effectively owned by the government, and they make it available to whoever needs it. So the licensing regime provides a fair taxation regime. It provides a clear definition of what the contract is between the company and the government. It ensures that you get non-discriminatory access to the pipelines you need to deliver into the system, and you get protection of property rights. And those, I'm sure I've missed things, but those were the things I kind of thought this was why we had a successful regime. And it was transparent. Everyone knew that they had an equal chance of getting a licence. Everyone knew the rules, and if you gave the best price, you would get the licence. If you gave the worst price, you wouldn't. So it was a competitive process. So then I go back to this history. So we'd had this monopoly. It had been performing poorly. Everyone knew it was performing poorly. And so Mrs. Thatcher decided that we would sell the whole of this nationalised company to shareholders. Now, once you do that and the company is in private hands, you can't just let it go free. You have got to still control it. And in particular, you've got a pipelines, which is a natural monopoly. So if you allow that company freedom to just charge what it likes, it can make huge profits. So you have to have something that controls the behaviour of that company to make sure it behaves on behalf of the country. So we created an independent regulator. We said, we want to stop the government interference. We want to make sure that regulator doesn't become a semi-government in its own right. It has to be independent of government. The government will set the broad rules by how the regulator works. And that's all transparent. Everyone knows what they are. But once we set them, the independent regulator will then regulate this company. And that's a technocratic job. It's a job to make sure that technocratically you do a good task to the best of your ability on behalf of the country. And I was the second independent regulator. So I came on board with this position. Basically, we had 100%, the 100% of the company was owned by shareholders, but it was a 100% monopoly within the UK. It was much more of a monopoly than the Naftogaz is. It owned absolutely everything on shore. All the domestic pipelines, all the transit pipelines, all the storage, all the gas supplies, everything, all the meters, everything you can think of, British Gas owns. So the regulator was there to make sure they didn't misbehave in owning those assets and perform on behalf of the country. But then we said, and this was my task, here we have this monopoly, frankly, it's still inefficient, it's still a monopoly, it's still not working as well as it could, so we need to introduce competition in the molecules, because the molecules, you can have lots of people putting gas in, lots of people taking it out. But as soon as you say that, you see that there's one big block to that. It's called the pipeline. So if you allow that pipeline operator to also be in the business of competing with the gas molecules, and it doesn't matter if it's associated, whatever the relationship is, if there's a commercial relationship between the company that owns the pipelines and the companies that are trying to compete, that company who owns the pipelines will find ways to disadvantage the competition. And no regulator, however good, however efficient, is ever going to be able to find out what those games that are being played. So we decided right from the start that the only way of introducing effective competition was to introduce unbundling. But the unbundling, in our case, the ideal thing is to have a different company, because then you know there's no. But we had a problem, this was privatised, so shareholders owned it. We couldn't intervene in that contract with shareholders. So what we had to introduce was a really rigorous, horrible, intrusive regime to ensure that that pipeline company owned by the same company that was competing could not behave badly. And actually what we introduced was a regime that's so foul and so intrusive that British Gas decided of its own accord to do the unbundling itself into two companies. So we kind of breathed a sigh of relief. We didn't have to have this really intrusive regime because they decided it was actually better to split up the business. And so now what we have is this competitive regime where the gas molecules are competitive from the time they're created to the time they arrive at the domestic customer. And what we have found is that having an effective competitive regime has lowered prices very significantly. It has introduced higher quality of service because no longer is a customer just a meter number. They're actually a real person who can make decisions and they can move away from you. And we've got a lot of innovation in services. And the other thing it does, you cannot, if you have too high prices, people will move away from you. If you have poor service, people will move away from you. So you have to behave reasonably. So you become like a normal company. Your customers come to you because they choose to. And so you have to behave quite differently from if you are a monopoly. So it's not completely straightforward, but it is hugely, hugely, hugely improved from the original situation. So what are the roles of the players in the market? Well, government is quite clearly setting the general policy. It is setting the taxation regime. It is also setting any subsidies that it feels that it needs to provide, but that is set by government. Then the regulator and the companies take those regimes on board and they make sure that they implement them. They set the policy for energy security and they set the policies for energy efficiency and any subsidies they want to make to that regime. The companies and the regulator then delivers those policies. And they also set the broad licence parameters before giving it to a different regulator, this time, but a single source regulator who then, and it happens to be in the Department of Energy, who makes sure that good operators get those licences in this transparent way. The companies compete for customers, or they're the pipeline company, they try and outperform the regulator and make money, and they have to be efficient. If they're not efficient, they don't survive. The independent regulator is there to ensure that the companies are getting fair returns, not excessive returns, that they're encouraging efficiency. They also need to encourage appropriate investment, because clearly you've got to make sure the investment in these pipelines is maintained, that you have a good quality system. And in our country, the licence regime is run by a different regulator, but the regulators are also running the licence regime. So what are the roles of the players? Well, once you've done this, it doesn't matter who owns the company. I don't care less in the UK whether the government owns it or whether independent shareholders own it. Bruno I met because he bought London Electricity, which happened, and I happened to be a customer of his. I didn't mind whether the French owned it, or the Germans owned it, or the United States owned it, or the UK. It's irrelevant who owns it once you've got the system right. And then it's up to, if the government owns it or the shareholders own it, it's up to them to decide to sell or to keep it. They receive the dividends, and they generally have the ability at the annual general meeting to sack the board if they don't like them. So that is there if they don't think the board is doing an effective job, and it is the board's decision to decide whether or not they sack the management because they think they're doing a good job or not. So the supervisory board holds the management accountable. It hires and fires management. It works together with management on creating strategy, on creating budgets, and then it's the management's job to deliver. And if they're not delivering, they get sacked. But it's their job, and they need to work with the board to create the strategy, to create the budgets, and most importantly, to implement the budgets and to implement the strategy. So, as I said, it does become irrelevant who owns the company. And it doesn't matter whether it's domestic, international, whether the government owns it, as long as you keep these roles really clear and very distinct. So where are we here? I mean, clearly we are not in that position here. As a supervisory board, we are not empowered to approve the strategy, we're not empowered to approve the financial plans of budgets, and we're not empowered to appoint and dismiss management. So we do need the new law to be adopted. We do need the new charter to be a new charter to be delivered, and I think it's really important for the whole country to ensure that the NABU is created to investigate and prosecute corruption, and also the OECD principles are embedded. And in the Ukraine, what needs to be done for successful unbundling? Well, we clearly need to build trust in the whole system. We need to build trust in the TSO. So we need to build an efficient TSO with a top-notch corporate governance control system. We need to engage a reputable partner, and I think we're learning from these interviews what a reputable partner wants to see. And we need, and I don't think this is here yet either, an independence and quality of a regulator, because you can't delegate these powers until you've got a good regulator in place to act on behalf of the country to make sure that this monopoly TSO is working efficiently. It clearly makes sense, as far as we can, particularly with Gazprom, with the contract coming to an end, to introduce more potential users of this system, to use the Ukraine system as far as we can for other people's gas, for other people's storage requirements, and for that we need to have a system that people find reliable and transparent. And we have the opportunity to create competitive transit fees as we go forward and system reliability. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.